3 days before my son's wedding, I drove to Petal and Grace Florist on Birchwood Avenue to finalize the centerpiece order. It should have taken 20 minutes. The owner met me at the door before I even reached the handle. Her name was Helen. Helen Marsh, 64 years old, the woman who had arranged flowers for my husband's funeral 11 years ago and for my son's prom corsage the year before that. She knew our family the way only a small-town florist can, through every milestone, every grief, every celebration. She looked at me now with an expression I had never seen on her face before. "Come inside," she said quietly, "and don't make a sound." I almost laughed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She locked the front door behind me, flipped the sign to closed, and guided me past the long refrigerated cases of roses and lilies into the back workroom. She pulled me behind a tall shelving unit crowded with ribbon spools and foam blocks, pressed one finger to her lips, and pointed at the wall. Voices, on the other side, clear enough that I could make out every word. My son's voice. And a woman's voice I recognized as his fiancée. And a third voice, male, measured, professional, that took me a moment to place. I held very still. "The amendment is on page 9, the man said. "She signs it at the reception, right after the toast. She won't question it if you frame it as the inheritance planning we discussed." My son's voice. "And if she does question it?" The woman, Melissa, his fiancée, the woman I had welcomed into my home for 2 years, the woman I had taken shopping for her wedding dress, said she won't. She trusts you more than anyone. That's what makes this so clean. The man again. "Once the Health Directive Amendment activates and Dr. Rowan files his certification Monday morning, the property trust transfers in full. The Lakeview house, the rental portfolio, everything in the Morrison Webb account, you'll have full fiduciary control within 72 hours. The room behind the ribbon spools went very small. Dr. Rowan, my physician, the man who had treated me since I moved to Cedarville after Gerald died, the man who sent me a Christmas card every year. My son's voice dropped. "And my mother?" Melissa answered before the other man could. "Cedarbrook is a lovely facility. She'll be well taken care of. She won't even understand what happened." I bit down on the inside of my lip until I tasted copper. Helen's hand found my wrists in the dark between the shelves. She held on. The voices continued for another few minutes. Something about timing, about wire transfers, about a name I didn't recognize yet. Cascade Partners. Then chairs scraped, footsteps, a door opening and closing. Silence. Helen turned to me. Her eyes were wet. "They've been here twice," she whispered. "Same conversation. Last Tuesday and again this morning. I didn't know if I should call you. I didn't know if you'd believe me." I looked at her for a long moment. "Do you still have the centerpiece order?" I asked. She blinked. "The peonies and garden roses, for the head table. I need to confirm the count." She stared at me. Yes, of course. Are you all right?" "I will be," I said. "Can you read it up for me?" "I'll wait." She disappeared into the front of the shop. I stood alone in the workroom among the spools of ribbon and the smell of cold water and stems. Outside, a Tuesday morning in June moved past the window like nothing at all had happened. A delivery truck. A woman walking a dog. A man in a baseball cap drinking coffee on his phone. I picked up my purse. I straightened my jacket. I walked to the front counter, confirmed my order, hugged Helen once, briefly, and went to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and did not move for a long time. The wedding was Saturday, 3 days. My name is Beverly Morrison Webb. I am 63 years old. I am a widow, a retired high school principal, and the sole trustee of a property portfolio my husband Gerald and I built together over 35 years. 7 rental properties, the family home on Lakeview Drive, and a trust my late mother-in-law established in 1987 that now holds just over $4 million. I raised one child, my son Nathan. And sitting in that parking lot, I understood that my son was planning to take everything. I didn't cry. I've never been much of a crier. Gerald used to say I process things the way an accountant processes numbers. Quietly, methodically, in private. He meant it as a compliment. I started the engine. I need to tell you something before I continue. Nathan was not a bad child. He was sweet when he was small. He used to bring me dandelions from the backyard like they were worth more than gold, and he'd watch my face to see if I was really pleased or just pretending. He was sensitive that way. Too sensitive maybe for a world that has a way of finding the sensitive ones and pressing on the bruise until something gives. He was 41 years old now. He'd had a good career. Civil engineer, stable, responsible. He'd been lonely for years after his first marriage fell apart, and then Melissa arrived 18 months ago, and I watched my son become a different person. Lighter, I thought at first. Hopeful, the loneliness lifting. I should have looked more carefully at what was lifting it. Gerald died of a stroke 11 years ago when Nathan was 30. We'd been married 32 years. I stood at his grave with Nathan beside me, and I made a promise to both of them. I would protect what we'd built. I would not fall apart. I would honor the life we'd made. I kept that promise, managed the properties myself, maintained the trust. Turned down 2 offers to sell the rental portfolio when the market ran high, because the income provided stability, and because Gerald had believed in the long game. By last year, the total value was approaching $6 million. Dr. Rowan had been my physician for 9 years. He was the one who'd managed my recovery after a minor cardiac event in 2020. A warning, not a crisis, but enough to require monitoring. He had all my records. He knew my medications, my history, my mother's history of early cognitive decline. He knew exactly what to fabricate. I drove home to Lakeview Drive and walked through the front door and stood in the kitchen with my car keys still in my hand. The rehearsal dinner was Friday. The wedding was Saturday at 4 o'clock at Grace Harbor Inn, 20 minutes from town. 140 guests. My toast was written, printed, folded into the pocket of the navy blazer hanging in my closet. 48 hours. My neighbor, Constance, was weeding her front flower bed when I stepped back outside 20 minutes later. We'd been friends for 22 years, since the week I moved to Lakeview Drive, and she appeared at my door with a loaf of homemade bread and absolutely no pretense. She was 70, sharper than most people I knew at 40, and she had never once told me what I wanted to hear instead of what I needed to. I walked across the yard and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she pulled off her gardening gloves and looked at me steadily. "Do you have a lawyer?" she asked. "Stuart Klein," I said. "I've used him for estate work for 12 years. Call him now." It's Tuesday morning. I know what day it is, Beverly. I called Stuart from Constance's kitchen while she made coffee. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I'd heard through the wall at Petal and Grace. I heard his chair creak as he sat forward. "The Health Directive Amendment," he said. "If it's structured the way you're describing, we can challenge it. But we need to move fast. Can you come in today?" 2 o'clock, I said. "Bring everything you have on the trust and the rental portfolio. And Beverly," he paused, "don't tell Nathan." I already hadn't planned to. Stuart's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Main Street that had been a hardware store when I first moved to town. He was 67, a widower himself, meticulous in a way that had always irritated me slightly and reassured me completely. He had a photograph of his late wife on the corner of his desk that he never turned away, even during difficult meetings. He read the documents I brought. He asked precise questions. He pulled up a legal database on his desktop and typed for several minutes. Then he looked up. The Morrison Webb Residential Trust, he said, has one critical vulnerability. The help directive rider your husband added in 2009 was intended to protect you. But if someone with medical authority certifies cognitive impairment and you have signed a fiduciary amendment transferring decision-making authority to Nathan, we have a very narrow window before the transfer is automatic. How narrow? If Rowan files Monday, we have until Wednesday noon. After that, Nathan has legal control. Without a court order, there's nothing I can do. I folded my hands in my lap. So we need a court order. We need evidence first. He wrote a name on the back of a business card and slid it across the desk. Frank DeLuca. He was a forensic accountant with the IRS for 23 years. He retired to Cedarville 2 years ago. If there's a financial trail, this Cascade Partners entity, any transfers, any preparation for asset movement, Frank will find it. I picked up the card. Just a name and a phone number, handwritten in Stewart's precise script. Can we trust him? I've used him on 3 estate fraud cases. He's the reason 2 of them ended in conviction. I stood up. Then I need to call him tonight. Stewart walked me to the door. He paused with his hand on the doorframe. Beverly, if we do this, if we go the route I'm thinking, it will be very public. Nathan's wedding day will not be what he planned. I looked at him. Nathan's wedding day, I said, was never going to be what I planned either. Frank DeLuca met me at a diner outside town at 7 that evening. He was 68, a compact man with gray eyes that noticed things without appearing to. He ordered black coffee and brought a yellow legal pad. Start from the beginning, he said. Don't leave anything out. I told him everything. The florist shop, the voices through the wall, Melissa's name on the Cascade Partners filing I'd found on the Delaware Secretary of State database in the 3 hours between Stewart's office and this booth, Dr. Rowan, the help directive writer, the timeline. He listened. He wrote. When I finished, he looked at his notes. Cascade Partners, LLC, he said. Delaware registration, you said March of this year? March 14th. 2 partners? Nathan Morrison Webb and Melissa Crane. He wrote it down. The money. Walk me through the assets again. I did. The 7 rental properties' current combined value approximately $2.3 million. The Lakeview Drive house appraised at $800,000. The Morrison Webb Family Trust, $4.1 million in managed accounts. Total exposure, Frank said, is just over $7 million. I had said the number to myself in the car. Hearing someone else say it made it more real and somehow smaller. It was just a number. Gerald and I had built it from nothing. A school teacher's salary and a civil engineer's. Saturday mornings at foreclosure auctions. 30 years of decisions made around this same kind of table over this same kind of coffee. It was a number. I could protect a number. There's something else, Frank said. He turned the legal pad around. He'd been making notes in 2 columns. In the right column, he'd written, Melissa Crane? Prior name? Melissa Voss? What is that? I asked. I'm not certain yet. I need overnight to verify. But when you said the name Cascade Partners and the structure you described, I want to check something. He looked at me. How much do you know about your future daughter-in-law's background? She told Nathan she grew up in Indianapolis, worked in commercial real estate before she moved here. We never had reason to look further. Let me look further, he said. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. at your lawyer's office. Bring your neighbor if she's the person you trust most. I'll have 3 things to show you. 3 things? Each one will tell a different part of the same story. He stood, left exact change on the table, and walked out. I sat in the parking lot for a while before I drove home. A sliver of moon over the tree line. The diner windows lit up orange behind me. I texted Constance, tomorrow 2 p.m., Stewart's office. I'll explain everything. Can you come? 3 dots appeared. Try to stop me, she wrote back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers in Gerald's old flannel shirt. I still wore it. 11 years later, I've never apologized for that. And I watched the ceiling and thought about the morning Nathan left for college. He'd stood in the driveway with an overfull duffel bag, and I'd told him, "Don't forget to call on Sundays." He'd rolled his eyes the way 22-year-olds do, because they think love is something that doesn't need maintenance. He called every Sunday for 4 years. When did I stop knowing him? At 5:30 in the morning, my phone lit up. Unknown number. A text. Found the shell company. Cascade Partners is the third. Milwaukee 2019, Phoenix 2022. There are other women. Call me when you're up. I was already sitting up. Frank DeLuca arrived at Stewart's office at 1:50, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had been used for 20 years and taken seriously for all of them. Constance sat beside me. Stewart sat across. The afternoon light came through the Venetian blinds and stripes across the conference table. Frank opened the briefcase and removed 3 folders. "Read first," he said. I opened it. A photograph. Melissa Crane. Or Melissa Voss, as the caption identified her, shaking hands with a man outside a building in downtown Phoenix. The timestamp read April 2022. "This is Craig Deaver," Frank said. "He's a financial crimes investigator in Arizona. He spent 3 years building a case against a woman who married a retired physician in Phoenix and used a health directive amendment to transfer his estate into an LLC before having him declared incompetent. The case fell apart on a technicality." He paused. The woman's name in Phoenix was Melissa Voss. Stewart leaned forward. "Same woman," Frank said. "Different name. The Phoenix victim was a retired cardiologist named Harold Barker, 71 years old, $2.8 million in assets. Melissa, then Voss, was engaged to his son. Same structure, health directive amendment, sympathetic physician LLC formed 3 months prior. Harold Barker died 18 months after being placed in memory care. He never got his money back." Constance put her hand on my arm. "The Milwaukee case in 2019, Frank continued, is less documented. She was using the name Melissa Grant. Similar pattern. Older woman, widowed, 1 adult child, established assets. That case was settled civilly, and the records are partially sealed. But the settlement required her to pay back 60% of what was transferred." He looked at me steadily. "You're the third," he said, "that we know of." I closed the red folder. "The blue one," he said. I opened it. Bank statements. An account in the name of Cascade Partners LLC opened February 18th of this year. The first deposit, $45,000, wired from a business account associated with a financial advisory firm I didn't recognize. "That firm," Frank said, "is a holding entity for Dr. Rowan's private investment accounts. He received $45,000 to perform one service, the cognitive assessment that would certify your impairment and trigger the health directive amendment." Stewart's jaw tightened. "That's conspiracy to commit elder financial fraud, at minimum." "At minimum," Frank agreed. "There's also this." He slid a printed email across the table. From Melissa Crane to Nathan Morrison Webb. Dated April 3rd. Subject line, timeline for the WWU account. "The health directive rider in the Webb Trust makes this straightforward," she'd written. "Rowan confirms we're on track. Once the certification is filed Monday, Stuart Klein won't be able to do anything. The transfer is automatic. By Wednesday, she won't have the legal standing to fight it. Make sure she signs at the reception. Use the estate planning framing. She'll believe you." I read it twice. My son hadn't written this, but he hadn't stopped it. "The black folder," Frank said quietly. I opened it. 3 case summaries. Names I didn't know. An 80-year-old woman in Cincinnati whose son-in-law had used a fraudulent guardianship filing to seize her house and pension. A 73-year-old retired nurse in Nashville whose daughter's boyfriend had worked with a corrupt social worker to have her declared incompetent over 14 months. A 68-year-old woman right here in Connecticut, a town called Weston, who had caught the scheme before it was completed, because her housekeeper had overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. The last one had fought back. Her name was Patricia Okafor, She was alive and she was willing to speak on camera. I closed the black folder. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Cedarville moved past in its ordinary Tuesday afternoon way. A woman with a stroller, a mail carrier sorting envelopes on the steps of the post office, two teenagers on bikes. $7 million. My name on a transfer document, a room in Cedarbrook facility that someone had already, apparently, been considering. If we do this at the wedding, I said without turning around, how much time do we have? Stewart answered, the transfer activates at 9 p.m. Saturday. Automated trigger tied to the health directive filing. If Rowan files Monday morning and we don't stop it at the source, we lose the window. But if we freeze the accounts before 9 p.m. Saturday. I filed an emergency petition with Judge Marion Howell this morning, Stewart said. She's retired, but she has the authority. She's reviewing it. If she approves the injunction before Saturday's reception, the freeze activates the moment we give her clerk the confirmation signal. I turned around. What's the signal? Stewart looked at me carefully. You giving your toast? That night, I sat in Gerald's study, with a glass of water and his photograph on the desk, and I told him everything that had happened. I do that sometimes. I'm not embarrassed about it. I don't know what Nathan knew, I said. I don't know where she ends and he begins in all of this. But I'm going to find out, and I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to do it in front of every person who has ever mattered to this family. The photograph didn't answer. It never does. But I slept that night, which was more than I'd expected. The rehearsal dinner was held at Grace Harbor Inn on Friday evening. White tablecloths, a view of the water, 60 people lifting champagne glasses while Nathan stood and thanked everyone for coming. He looked like himself. That was the hardest part. He looked like my son, the one who brought me dandelions, who called every Sunday, who stood at his father's grave and cried in a way he thought I couldn't see. He looked like that person. Melissa stood beside him, her hand on his arm, smiling at every face in the room. She smiled at me longest. I smiled back. At 9:30, a man I didn't recognize walked through the door of the rehearsal dinner and crossed directly to Melissa. I watched from across the room. He was heavy-set, mid-40s, wearing a jacket that didn't quite fit. He leaned in close and said something I couldn't hear. Melissa's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened on Nathan's arm. The man left without speaking to anyone else. I texted Frank under the table. Who is the heavy-set man who just walked in and out? His response came in 40 seconds. Craig Deaver, Arizona investigator. He's not here for her. He's here for me. He drove up to testify if needed. That was a coincidence, but good instinct. I put my phone away. Saturday morning came in gray and quiet, the way June mornings do in Connecticut when the fog hasn't burned off yet. I dressed carefully. The navy blazer, the pearl earrings Gerald had given me for our 25th anniversary, the low heels I'd broken in over 3 weeks, specifically so I wouldn't be thinking about my feet when I needed to be thinking about other things. Constance arrived at 8 with coffee and sat with me at the kitchen table while I went through the speech one more time, not the version in my jacket pocket, but the other version, the one I'd written Wednesday night and memorized by Thursday morning. Are you ready? She asked. No, I said honestly, but I'm going anyway. She squeezed my hand. That's the same thing. The ceremony was beautiful. I want to be clear about that because it was the harbor behind the inn, the late afternoon light on the water, the white chairs on the lawn, the roses Helen Marsh had arranged with her own hands. My son standing at the end of the aisle in his father's cufflinks, which I had given him the night before without explanation, and he had put them on without asking for one. I walked down the aisle alone. There was no one to walk with me, and I sat in the front row and I watched my son marry a woman who had planned to destroy my life. I watched him say the vows. I watched his hands shake slightly when he took her hands. I watched her smile at him with something that looked from a distance like love. I don't know. Even now, I don't know. The reception began at 6. The band played. People danced. I moved through the room and spoke to old friends and Gerald's college roommate and 2 former colleagues from the school district, and I smiled and accepted compliments on my jacket, and I did not once look at the clock. At 8:15, the master of ceremonies lifted the microphone. And now, we'd like to invite the mother of the groom to say a few words. I stood. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I carried nothing to the podium. No cards, no paper. "Good evening," I said. "Thank you all for being here." I looked out at the room. 140 faces, my son's face in the front. Melissa's beside him. "I want to tell you about Nathan's father," I said. And I did. Gerald at 32, carrying lumber into a foreclosure property on a Saturday morning with paint in his hair, telling me this was going to be something. Gerald at 50, sitting across from me at a table not unlike the tables in this room, saying we built something real, Bev, something that lasts. Gerald believed that everything worth having takes time, I said. Time and honesty and the willingness to face hard things directly instead of going around them. The room was quiet now, not the polite quiet of people waiting for the next sentence. A different kind. "He passed that belief to our son," I said, "and I have spent the last 3 days hoping it went deep enough." Nathan frowned, slightly, not enough that anyone else would notice. I nodded toward the back of the room. Frank DeLuca stood near the audio-visual booth. He pressed a button. A screen lowered behind me. "What I'm about to share with you," I said, "is not what anyone in this room expected tonight. I know that. But I want you to understand that what I'm doing for my son as much as for myself." The first document appeared on the screen. The Cascade Partners LLC filing, Delaware, March 14th. 2 partners, Nathan Morrison Webb and Melissa Crane. I heard someone say, "Oh my God," near table 6. Cascade Partners, I said, was incorporated 4 months ago to receive a transfer of the Morrison Webb Family Trust and associated properties. The total value of those assets is approximately $7 million. Nathan stood up. "Mom, please sit down, sweetheart." He sat. His face was the color of the white tablecloths. "I want to show you the plan," I said. The next slide appeared. A timeline. August through October in Melissa's handwriting from a document Frank had recovered from Cascade's filing records. Health Directive Certification, Dr. Rowan, Monday. Trust transfer automatic by Wednesday. Property deed transfers initiated Thursday. BM at Cedarbrook, within 60 days. BM, Beverly Morrison. Several guests stood up at once. I raised my hand and the room settled. "Dr. James Rowan," I said, "was paid $45,000 to certify that I have cognitive impairment. I do not. I have every board meeting minute from the Cedarville School District from the last 3 years, where I served on the academic committee. I have my physician's independent evaluation from Yale New Haven Health, completed last week, which I'd like to read from." I pulled a single sheet from my jacket pocket. "No evidence of cognitive decline. Memory, executive function, and processing speed are consistent with a healthy adult in her early 50s. Patient is exceptionally sharp." I folded it and put it back. "The scheme," I said, "did not begin with me." The third slide. Patricia Okafor's face appeared on a screen, live video, her sitting room in Weston, 20 miles away. Her voice came through the speakers, steady and clear. "My name is Patricia Okafor. I am 68 years old. In 2022, the same structure you're hearing about tonight was used against me. A health directive amendment, a cooperative physician, an LLC formed to receive the transfer. The only reason I am sitting in my own home tonight is because my housekeeper overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear." She looked directly at the camera. "They count on your isolation," she said. "They count on the people who love you either not noticing or not believing what they see. Don't let them count on you." The screen went dark. Melissa pushed back her chair. Two men in dark blazers who had been sitting at a table near the exit stepped forward simultaneously. "Melissa Crane," the first one said, "also known as Melissa Voss and Melissa Grant, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder financial fraud, wire fraud, and financial exploitation of a protected adult." She didn't struggle. She stood very still while they placed handcuffs on her wrists. And she looked at Nathan with an expression I couldn't read, and then she looked at me with one I could read perfectly, and then she walked out of Grace Harbor Inn with both officers beside her. 15 seconds later, Stuart's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, nodded once, and said, "Judge Howell's order is in effect. All accounts are frozen." The clock on the wall read 8:57. 3 minutes before the automated transfer would have executed. The room erupted. I stepped back from the podium. My legs felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. I looked at Nathan. He was still in his chair. He hadn't moved. His father's cufflinks caught the light. His face was doing something complicated and private, the way faces do when they're deciding what they actually are. I crossed the room and sat down beside him. We didn't speak for a long time. "How much did you know?" I finally asked. He stared at the empty chair across the table where Melissa had been sitting. "I knew she wanted to help you transition management of the trust," he said. His voice was flat, careful. "She said you were getting older. She said the properties were a lot to manage alone. She said Dr. Rowan had mentioned. She said he mentioned some concerns. Did Dr. Rowan ever say that to you directly?" A long silence. "No," he said. "Did you ask him?" Another silence. "No," he said. I looked at my son's profile. He'd had the same profile since he was 12. Gerald's jawline, my mother's nose, a face I had memorized before he could talk. "Nathan, the Cascade Partners filing, your name is on it." He closed his eyes. "She said it was estate planning. She said it was standard." He stopped. "I signed things I didn't read closely enough. I know that." "There's a difference," I said, "between not reading closely enough and knowing what was being built." He opened his eyes and looked at me for the first time since I'd stepped away from the podium. "I didn't know about the other women," he said. "I didn't know about Phoenix. I didn't know about Milwaukee. I didn't know it was $7 million or that there was a room at Cedarbrook with your name on the list." He reached across the table and put his hand on mine. "I'm sorry," he said. I looked at his hand on mine. Same hand since he was small almost. They'd gotten larger and more calloused, but the shape of them was the same. "We're going to have to be very honest with each other," I said. "About all of it. About what you knew and when and why you didn't ask the questions you should have asked." "I know. That's going to be hard." "I know," he said again. I did not pull my hand away. By 11 o'clock, the guests had mostly gone. Gerald's college roommate, Dennis, had embraced me at the door and not said a single word, which was exactly right. Stuart and Frank sat with Constance and me in a corner of the now empty reception hall, shoes off, the remains of a wedding dinner on tables around us. Stuart spread the legal summary on the tablecloth. "Melissa Crane has a prior civil settlement in Milwaukee," he said. "The Arizona case gives us the pattern evidence. With the Cascade Partners filing, Dr. A. Rowan's payment trail, and Patricia Okafor's testimony, we're looking at federal wire fraud charges in addition to the state elder abuse statute." "What about Rowan?" Constance asked. "Medical board hearing Monday. His license will be suspended pending investigation." Stuart paused. "He's already cooperating." Frank looked at me. "Nathan." I folded my hands. He signed documents he should have read. He believed things he should have questioned. But he didn't understand what was being built, and he didn't benefit from it. The prosecutors will make their own determination. "And you?" Frank asked. I looked around the room. The white tablecloths, the roses Helen Marsh had arranged, the chairs that had held 140 people who had watched something entirely different from the wedding they'd planned to attend. "I need to sleep," I said, And then I need to figure out what's left. It was late when I drove home to Lakeview Drive. The house was dark. I unlocked the front door and stood in the hallway for a moment, just breathing the familiar smell of it. Old wood, the lavender sachet I keep in the coat closet, something indefinably like home. I went to Gerald's study, sat in his chair, looked at his photograph. I kept my promise. I told him. All of it. 6 months later, December in Connecticut, the oak tree in the backyard bare and the sky the color of old pewter. I sat in the same chair with a cup of tea and thought about what the year had been. Melissa Crane pleaded guilty in October to federal wire fraud and conspiracy to commit elder financial fraud. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, with full restitution required to Harold Barker's estate, to the Milwaukee victim, who came forward after the trial, and to me, though I knew the restitution would be largely symbolic. Her assets, modest as they turned out to be, were seized. The $45,000 she had paid Dr. Rowan was recovered from his accounts. Dr. Rowan's medical license was permanently revoked in September. He pled guilty to 1 count of fraud and was sentenced to 4 years, with 2 suspended. He lost his retirement accounts to restitution orders. The last I heard, he was living with his daughter in Rhode Island. Nathan was not charged. The prosecutors reviewed the evidence and determined that while his negligence had been significant, his participation in the scheme was not knowing or intentional. He resigned from the Cascade Partners entity the week after the wedding that wasn't, as I'd started to call it privately, and cooperated fully with the investigation. He moved back to Cedarville in September. Not to Lakeview Drive, to an apartment on the other side of town, which was the right distance. He was in therapy twice a week. We had dinner on Sundays, usually at Constance's house, where the table was big enough and the conversation was honest. We were careful with each other. We were learning to be careful in a new way, the way you have to be after something breaks and you're deciding whether to repair it or replace it. We were choosing repair. It was slow. The Morrison-Webb Family Trust was restructured in August. Stewart added independent oversight requirements, dual signature authority on all distributions, and a provision requiring annual independent review of any fiduciary amendments. Everything Gerald and I had built was still standing. Patricia Okafor came to Cedarville in October. We had lunch at a cafe downtown, and she told me about her housekeeper, the woman who had overheard the conversation and been afraid to speak for 3 days before she did. I told her she saved my life, Patricia said. She said she was just doing what was right. I told her doing what's right isn't always easy, and she said no, but it's always simple. I thought about Helen Marsh at Petal and Grace, the locked door, the look on her face. I didn't know if you'd believe me. Simple, I said. Simple, Patricia agreed. In November, Nathan brought me a plant for the kitchen windowsill, a small rosemary in a terracotta pot. No card, no explanation. I put it in the window and I've been watering it every morning since. In December, I drove to the cemetery on a Tuesday afternoon. Gerald's grave, the simple granite marker we'd chosen together years before he needed it. I sat on the bench nearby and told him all of it. The florist shop, the folder Frank had laid on the table, the wedding that became something else, the slow Sunday dinners, the rosemary plant. We're okay, I told him. It's different than I thought okay would look, but it's real. The December wind moved through the bare trees at the edge of the cemetery. No answer. Just the wind and the light going gray and the particular quiet of a place that holds what's finished. I drove home to Lakeview Drive. I unlocked the front door. I watered the rosemary. And I thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that the things worth protecting are almost never the things we think we're protecting. Not the money, not the portfolio, not the trust document with its carefully worded amendments. It's the smaller things. The Sunday dinners. The neighbor who shows up at 8 in the morning with coffee and no pretense. The son's hand, shaped like his father's, reaching across a table. The florist who locks the door and says, "Come inside," because she has known you long enough to know you'd want the truth however it breaks you. Those are the things I was protecting all along. I just didn't know it until I almost lost them. The rosemary is still on the kitchen windowsill. I water it every morning. Nathan brought it in November without a card, without an explanation. And I think that's exactly right. Some things don't need to be explained. They just need to be tended. I've thought a lot about what made all of this possible. Not the legal filings, not the frozen accounts, not the courtroom in October where Melissa sat with her hands folded and her face unreadable. I mean, what made it possible for me to walk out of that florist shop and do what needed to be done instead of collapsing under the weight of it. Part of it was Helen, a woman who could have stayed quiet, who had every practical reason to stay quiet, chose not to. That choice cost her nothing material and everything emotionally, and she made it anyway because she knew it was right. I've been thinking about that kind of integrity ever since, not the dramatic kind that announces itself. The quiet kind that locks a door and says, "Come inside," because a person you've known for 20 years deserves the truth, even when the truth is going to hurt her. I didn't always have that kind of integrity myself. I want to be honest about that. There were things I didn't look at closely enough. Not about Melissa specifically, but about Nathan. About the distance that had grown between us over the years, the conversations I postponed because the school board calendar was full, the Sunday calls that became shorter and then less frequent, and then something I stopped noticing. Gerald used to say that the things we ignore don't go away. They just find other shapes. He was right, and I ignored him being right. And eventually, what I'd ignored found the shape of a woman named Melissa Crane, and a filing in Delaware and a room reserved at Cedarbrook. There's a version of the story where I don't trust my own judgment, where I hear what I heard through that wall, and I talk myself out of believing it, because believing it requires me to believe that my son, my dandelion-bringing, Sunday-calling son, had allowed himself to be used as an instrument against me. It would have been easier not to believe it. I've watched people choose easier. I understand the appeal. But I've also watched what easier costs, and the bill always comes due. What Frank laid on that conference table in 3 folders, the pattern, the prior victims, the $45,000, didn't just show me what Melissa had done. It showed me what happens when people don't ask the questions they're afraid to ask. Harold Barker in Phoenix didn't get his money back. The woman in Milwaukee got 60 cents on the dollar. 2 of Patricia O'Coffer's parallel cases ended in deaths that didn't have to happen when they did. I asked the questions. I hired the people who knew how to find the answers. I stood at that podium on a Saturday evening in June, and I said what needed to be said in front of 140 people, some of whom will never look at me the same way, and most of whom, I think, were grateful someone did. That's not courage in any grand sense. It's just the decision not to flinch when flinching would cost you more than standing still. Nathan and I are careful with each other now. We're learning what honest looks like between 2 people who love each other and failed each other and are choosing to try again. It's slow. Some Sunday dinners are easier than others. But he shows up, and I show up, and we are building something that is smaller and more real than what we had before. I think that's what Gerald meant by the long game. Not the assets, not the portfolio, the willingness to keep showing up, to keep asking the hard questions, to keep choosing the truth even when the easier thing is right there and no one would blame you for taking it. The rosemary is still alive. That feels like enough for now.